You can land in Los Angeles and see the dream first. Palm trees, studio gates, beach hotels, red carpets. A city that still knows how to look rich, clean, and camera ready. And this year, the official numbers gave Los Angeles something else to sell. Homelessness was falling again. But a few miles from the postcard, Skid Row tells a harder story. Sidewalks still carry tents. Freeway edges still hold people in the morning light. Shelter lines still form before the city has finished selling another sunset. After federal review, Los Angeles County still counted 72,195 people experiencing homelessness. That number is lower than before, but it is still larger than the entire homeless population of many American regions. So the question is not whether LA improved. It did. The question is why a decline this big still looks like a disaster on the ground. And that question is where the real Los Angeles story begins. On the surface, Los Angeles looks like a city built to be watched. Hollywood signs, studio gates, palm-lined boulevards, beach sunsets, luxury hotels, camera crews chasing the clean angle. But behind that image is another Los Angeles. Skid Row, by corridors, freeway underpasses, shelter entrances, motel rooms paid by the week, families close enough to the edge that one missed shift can become a housing emergency. This is not a simple collapse story. It is a progress paradox. In the next 25 minutes, you will see three things: why the official count went down, why the street still looks overwhelmed, and why progress in Los Angeles can be real and still not feel like relief. Because LA did not prove the crisis was over. It proved that a crisis this large can improve and still look unbearable. But before the numbers, I want to know what LA looks like from your city. Before we go deeper into Los Angeles, tell us where you are watching from. In your city, where does homelessness become visible first? Downtown sidewalks, transit stations, freeway underpasses, parks, motel corridors, beach parking lots, or somewhere tourists rarely see. Because Los Angeles is not the only city with two versions of itself. It is just one of the most famous. From the outside, LA still looks like a city that knows how to sell the dream. A visitor can land at LAX past the billboards, see the studio gates, book the beach hotel, and feel like the postcard is still intact. But Los Angeles also has another map: Skid Row, RV lines, freeway edges, shelter entrances, sidewalks where people wake up before the city's tourist economy fully opens its eyes. That is why the official decline is complicated. A smaller number can be real. A visible crisis can still remain. Both things can be true at the same time. For city leaders, the decline is proof that something is working. For residents, workers, and outreach teams, the question is whether that progress has reached the blocks where the crisis is still hardest to ignore. And for the people living inside the crisis, the question is simpler. Did anything change enough to give them a door that stays theirs? Before we go further, I want to ask you something. If Los Angeles counted fewer people experiencing homelessness, why does the crisis still look so large on the ground? Did the crisis truly shrink? Or did the number move faster than the street did? Write your guess in the comments. The answer comes in the second half of this video. And once you see it, Los Angeles becomes more complicated than a city in decline. It becomes a city where progress and disaster can stand on the same block. First, look at the number city leaders wanted the country to see: 72,195. That is the number Los Angeles had to explain. Not in some forgotten county, not in a city with no money, no global image, and no reason to expect better. This was Los Angeles County, the place that sells beaches, studios, sports arenas, award shows, luxury hotels, and the idea that reinvention is always possible if the camera is pointed in the right direction. And in 2025, the number finally moved down. LASA first announced that homelessness had fallen by 4% countywide. After federal review, the final number was revised slightly lower to 72,195 people experiencing homelessness across Los Angeles County. The city of Los Angeles finalized at 43,695. The Los Angeles Continuum of Care finalized at 67,777. Those are not small numbers, but the trend gave city leaders something real to point to. Countywide unsheltered homelessness dropped by 9.5%. In the city of Los Angeles, unsheltered homelessness dropped by 7.9%. That matters. Fewer people outside matters. More people connected to shelter housing or services matters. But this is where the story becomes harder than a press conference. Because a decline does not tell you what remains. It does not tell you what one block looks like at 6 in the morning. It does not tell you whether the shelter bed becomes an apartment. It does not tell you whether the person who moved indoors stayed indoors. That is the limit of the number. It can show direction. It cannot show relief. The shocking part is not that LA's number went down. It is how high it remained. The first proof of that problem is not in the press conference. It is on a sidewalk east of Main Street, a folding chair, a medication bag, a plastic folder, a shelter referral card. Raymond is not proof that the count is wrong. He is proof that a decline can still leave a disaster on the sidewalk. To understand what the number leaves behind, enter Skid Row. Raymond is not a real person. He is a composite built from public homelessness data, Los Angeles reporting outreach patterns, and recurring details described by people who work around Skid Row. Call him Raymond. He is 61. He keeps a folding chair near the curb because standing all day is harder than people think. Beside it is a medication bag, a cracked phone, a shelter referral card, and a plastic folder with documents he has learned not to lose. This is not the Hollywood version of Los Angeles. This is the morning version. The version where a person's whole day can depend on whether a bathroom is open, whether a charger works, whether the shelter list moves, and whether the folder in his bag stays dry. The street vendors are setting up. The delivery trucks are passing. Office workers are still blocks away. The city has not fully performed itself yet, and in that early light, the contrast is harder to edit out. On Skid Row, a decline in the official count does not feel like a headline. It feels like waiting to see whether the shelter line moves. It feels like checking whether the phone still has battery. It feels like deciding which appointment matters most when the bus ride, the document, and the available bed do not line up. A documentary has to be fair. If Los Angeles counted fewer people experiencing homelessness, then that decline deserves to be taken seriously. If fewer people were sleeping outside, that matters. If more people moved indoors, that matters too. But Raymond is proof of something else. He is proof that a decline can still leave severe suffering, visible block by block, especially in a place where the crisis has been concentrated for so long that outsiders sometimes mistake endurance for normal life. A number can fall while a sidewalk still carries more need than any one outreach team can handle. A county-wide trend can improve while one person is still waiting for a place with a door that stays his. Progress is not fake just because Raymond is still outside. But Raymond does not disappear just because progress is real. He is the remainder after the trend line moves down. And the remainder is where LA's real problem begins. So what changed? The first answer is simple. The official count moved down. Los Angeles County reported a countywide decline. Unsheltered homelessness fell. The city of Los Angeles also reported a drop in people living outside. More people were connected to shelter interim housing services or permanent housing pathways than the city had been able to show in earlier years. That is not nothing. It means outreach reached some people. It means some encampments became rooms. It means some people who had been sleeping outside were no longer counted outside. It means the system, at least in some places, started moving in the right direction. But what did not change? The scale, the geography, the pressure. 72,195 people is still not a small emergency. It is not a manageable footnote. It is not a problem the city can hide behind a percentage. A 4% decline can be real. A 9.5% decline in unsheltered homelessness can be real. And Skid Row can still look overwhelmed because the public does not experience homelessness as a spreadsheet. It experiences it as blocks, as underpasses, as shelter lines, as RV corridors, as a person curled under a blanket near a bus stop while traffic moves around them. The count is useful, but it is not the whole story. A point-in-time count is a snapshot of one night, not the full weather system of poverty around it. It can show direction. It can show categories. It can show whether the line is moving up or down. But it cannot show every motel room. It cannot show every couch. It cannot show every family one missed paycheck away from visibility. That is when the count becomes less like an answer and more like a question. What kind of progress is enough when the remaining crisis still fills the street? The crisis is not only where the tents are, it is also where the rent almost broke. That is where Elena enters the story. Elena is not a real person. She is a composite built from housing, instability patterns, family homelessness, data, motel instability, and the kind of working poverty that does not always appear in a tourist photograph of Los Angeles. She is 42. She does not live on Skid Row. She does not sleep beside a tent. She does not look to a passerby like the crisis people imagine when they hear the word homeless. That is exactly why she matters. In the trunk of her car, there is a laundry bag, a school backpack, a gas station coffee cup, and a motel receipt folded twice because she still has to know what night was paid for and what night was not. Some weeks Elena is indoors. But indoors is not the same as stable. A motel room can feel like rescue on Monday and a deadline by Friday. A relative's couch can work for 2 nights and collapse by the third. A car can become storage, transportation, and emergency shelter all at once. This is the part of Los Angeles homelessness that does not always look like Los Angeles homelessness. It is not always a tent. Sometimes it is a mother making sure a child's backpack looks normal while the address is not. Sometimes it is a worker who still has a uniform but no lease. Elena shows why street visibility is only one layer. Raymond is what the crisis looks like after it becomes public. Elena is what the crisis looks like before it becomes visible. And Los Angeles has both. That is the open secret behind LA's decline. If the city only counts what is most visible, it may miss the pressure building just outside the frame. Los Angeles did not prove homelessness was over. It proved that even a real decline can be hard to feel when the remaining crisis is this large. That is the open secret. A 4% decline matters. A nearly 10% decline in unsheltered homelessness matters. A person moving from a tent into a room matters. But 72,000 people still experiencing homelessness means the city is not looking at a small remainder. It is looking at a crisis so large that even progress can feel swallowed by scale. The city can improve and still look overwhelmed. It can house more people and still have thousands outside. It can reduce the count and still leave residents, workers, visitors, and unhoused people asking why the street has not changed enough. This is not hypocrisy. It is math. When a crisis gets this large, improvement does not automatically become relief. A smaller number may still be too large for the shelter system, too large for outreach teams, too large for hospitals, too large for neighborhoods, and too large for the people living inside it. Raymond is the part that remains visible till the number moves in the right direction. Elena is the pressure that may not show up clearly until the motel payment fails, the couch disappears, or the car becomes the last private room left. From City Hall, the trend can look like progress. From Skid Row, the progress can look incomplete. From a motel parking lot, the next wave may already be forming. A smaller disaster is still a disaster. Now, the second number changes what progress means. Back in Act 2, I asked you a question. If Los Angeles counted fewer people experiencing homelessness, why does the crisis still look so large on the ground? Did the crisis truly shrink, or did the number move faster than the street did? The answer is uncomfortable because both things can be partly true. The decline is real. The remaining crisis is real. That is what makes the story more complicated than outrage and more serious than celebration. The city and county can point to progress. They can point to a lower total. They can point to fewer people counted outside. They can point to programs, placements, outreach, interim housing, and permanent housing work that move some people away from the street. That should not be erased. But a number can move in the right direction and still leave the public staring at a crisis that feels impossible to reconcile with the city's wealth. A decline can be celebrated in a report. A disaster can remain on the sidewalk. That gap is where public trust breaks. If leaders only say the number is down, people on the street feel ignored. If critics only say nothing changed, the people who moved indoors disappear from the story. Both versions are too small. I kept looking at the decline. I kept looking at Skid Row. Then the word progress started to change. Los Angeles County fell to 72,195 people, and that was still the crisis. A decline, a disaster, both true. That is the reveal. Not because Los Angeles did nothing, not because the decline was meaningless, but because the remaining number was still large enough to define the city's moral problem. What does it mean to improve when 72,000 people that still do not have stable housing? What does it mean to say the system is working if Raymond is still waiting with a shelter card in his folder? What does it mean to say the crisis is falling if Elena is one motel bill away from entering it? The uncomfortable question is not whether LA improved. It did. The question is whether the city can survive calling this enough. If the decline becomes a beginning, Los Angeles may finally be turning a corner. If the decline becomes the story officials tell while the sidewalk remains overwhelmed, then the city has only learned how to make a disaster slightly smaller. And that is where LA's defenders have a serious point. Los Angeles deserves credit. That has to be said clearly. A smaller count is better than a larger count. Fewer people sleeping outside is better than more people sleeping outside. More people connected to shelter housing and services is better than leaving everyone in the same place year after year. No serious documentary should pretend improvement does not matter. It matters to the person who gets a room. It matters to the outreach worker who finally reaches someone after months of contact. It matters to the neighborhood where an encampment no longer has to function as an emergency housing system. It matters to the person who no longer has to sleep under a freeway edge beside traffic, smoke, noise, and fear. So the city's defenders have a point. Progress is real, but progress is not the same as resolution. That is the line Los Angeles cannot cross too quickly. A person moved into interim housing still needs a permanent exit. A shelter bed still has to become stability. A motel room still has to become an address. A housing placement still has to last long enough to matter next year. A lower number does not answer all of that. It only tells the city that the direction may be changing. The next question is whether the people moved out of homelessness stayed out of homelessness. Did they get permanent housing? Did they keep it? Did they return to shelter? Did new people enter the system faster than others could leave? That is the harder audit. It is less dramatic than a press release and harder to fit into a headline, but it is the audit that tells whether a city is ending homelessness or managing a slower version of it. Los Angeles can be doing better than before and still not be doing enough for the scale of the crisis it built up over time. It can deserve credit for reducing harm. It does not get to call harm solved. So the real test is not whether the number fell. It is what made it fall and whether people stayed housed. So what actually works in a city this large and unequal? Not as a slogan, not as a campaign line, as a system that could make the decline visible on the sidewalk, not only visible in the report. First, permanent housing exits have to be the measure that matters most. Interim housing can save a night. Shelter can interrupt danger. A motel room can bring someone indoors. But the question has to be, where does the person go after that? For Raymond's success is not just a shelter card, it is a door that remains his, a mailbox with his name on it, a place where a medication bag can stay on the same shelf tomorrow, next month, and 6 months from now. Second, housing navigation has to move faster than the street can pull people back. This is where many systems fail quietly. A person can be ready for housing in theory and still lose the opportunity in practice because the next appointment is too late. The phone dies, the document is missing, or the landlord moves on. Documents identification benefits, medical appointments, landlord applications, and inspections all sound like paperwork, but for someone outside paperwork is survival infrastructure. Third, Los Angeles needs more housing for extremely low-income people. Not only market-rate apartments, not only luxury units with affordability promises somewhere else, not only temporary rooms that reset the crisis by another 30 days, the city needs housing that people with the lowest incomes can actually enter and keep. Fourth, interim housing has to be designed as a bridge, not a warehouse. A temporary room should come with a clock, a plan, and a destination. Without that, interim housing can become a cleaner place to wait, while the permanent housing shortage continues outside the door. Fifth, prevention has to be treated as homelessness policy. That is Elena's lesson. If a motel bill is about to push a family into the system, a small intervention before the fall can be more humane and less expensive than emergency response afterward. Rental assistance, legal help, flexible funds, and eviction prevention are not side programs. They are how a city stops tomorrow's visible crisis from forming. Sixth, supportive housing remains essential for people with the highest needs. Some people need more than a key. They need health care, mental health support, substance use treatment, access, case management, and a landlord willing to work with a complicated history. Housing without support may fail. Support without housing also fails. Seventh, LA has to track returns to homelessness as seriously as it tracks placements. How many people moved inside? That matters. But how many stayed housed? How many returned to the street? How many waited too long in interim housing? How many were lost between referral and lease? Those are the numbers that show whether progress is reaching the ground. The answer is not to deny progress. It is to make progress reach the sidewalk. Because if it does not, Los Angeles pays twice. The cost of a smaller disaster does not disappear. It keeps moving. It moves from outreach to emergency response, from emergency response to hospitals, from hospitals to shelter operations, from shelter operations to cleanup cycles, from cleanup cycles back to the same sidewalk where the original problem was never fully solved. Los Angeles can celebrate a lower number and still pay for a crisis too large to manage. That is the financial trap. The city pays when housing is not built, pays when prevention arrives too late, pays when shelter stays lengthen, and pays again when people return to the street. Raymond pays in waiting. He waits for a bed. He waits for a phone call. He waits for a document to be accepted. He waits for the next outreach contact. He waits while his medication bag, plastic folder, shelter card, and cracked phone become the fragile system he has to manage every day. That is not stability. That is survival with paperwork. Elena pays before the street sees her. A motel bill, a missed shift, a gas tank that has to last until Friday, a school backpack that has to make life look normal for one more morning, a laundry bag in the trunk because there is no closet where the clothes belong. That is not security. That is a countdown. The public pays too. Residents pay through frustration. Businesses pay through uncertainty. Hospitals pay through repeat crisis care. Outreach teams pay through exhaustion. City departments pay when short-term fixes become long-term cycles. And the political system pays in trust, because when people hear the number went down but still see suffering on the ground, they begin to believe either the count is meaningless or the city is lying. The truth is more precise. Something improved. Not enough changed where people could feel it. That is the Los Angeles lesson. A city can reduce the count and still pay the price of a crisis too large to leave behind. The smaller number matters, but the remaining disaster decides whether people feel safer, whether neighborhoods feel stable, and whether the next count keeps moving down. And this is not only Los Angeles. Return to Raymond's plastic folder. Not the press conference, not the skyline, not the percentage. The folder. Inside it is the proof he has to keep producing. A referral card, a document, a name, a number, a piece of paper that might move him forward if it is still clean, still readable, still in his possession when someone asks for it. That one object tells you what the crisis really is. It is the constant requirement to prove document and reapply, wait and remain reachable while living in conditions that make all of those things harder. A housed person has a drawer. Raymond has a folder. A housed person has an address. Raymond has a card. The same thing that leaves Raymond waiting on a Los Angeles sidewalk is closer to the thing pushing people into San Francisco streets, Phoenix parking lots, Denver hotel rooms, and Las Vegas tunnels than most cities want to admit. The details change. The shape does not. In San Francisco, visible street homelessness becomes a test of whether wealth can coexist with public suffering. In Phoenix, heat turns the housing crisis into a survival crisis. In Denver, people move indoors and then wait for the exit. In Las Vegas, people disappear into hidden spaces the tourist economy was never built to show. In Los Angeles, the number goes down and the sidewalk still asks whether the city has done enough. That is the national mirror. Every city wants to report progress, and every city should want progress. But progress that cannot be felt by the people still outside becomes fragile. Every city wants a better number. But the real question is not whether a count can improve. The real question is whether the person on the ground can feel the improvement in the form of housing. Raymond's folder belongs to Los Angeles, but the warning belongs to America. The smaller disasters are spreading. So the question is not whether your city can report progress. It is whether people can feel it on the ground. Here is the part that asks something of you. Not pity, not outrage. 5 questions. Especially when a city announces that homelessness is finally moving in the right direction and asks the public to believe the crisis is turning. 1. Look up your city's point-in-time count. Do not stop at the headline number. 2. Compare sheltered and unsheltered. Ask whether people moved indoors or whether the crisis only changed category. 3. Ask how many people reached permanent housing, not just interim shelter. 4. Ask how many people returned to homelessness after being placed. 5. Ask what your city calls progress. Is progress a lower count, a cleared block, a shelter bed, a signed lease, or a person still housed 6 months later? This is not about declaring Los Angeles a failure. It is about refusing to let a smaller disaster become the definition of success. Los Angeles is more useful than that. It shows that progress can be real. It also shows that progress can be too small for the scale of the crisis left behind, especially when the people remaining are the hardest to house and the easiest to ignore. Can your city reduce the number? That is the first question. Can it reduce the suffering people still see on the ground? That is the harder one. By 2029, Los Angeles will either be the city that turned a real decline into lasting housing or the city that mistook a smaller disaster for a solution. The choice in some small is also yours. And Raymond's shelter card is the image LA cannot afford to misunderstand. In the morning, Skid Row does not look like a percentage. It looks like Raymond folding a document back into a plastic folder. A shelter card, a cracked phone, a medication bag, a chair pulled close to the curb because the day is already starting. Somewhere else in Los Angeles, cameras will find palm trees, studio gates, beach hotels, and another clean angle of the city that still knows how to sell the dream. Both images belong to the same place. The number went down. The sidewalk remained. That is the lesson inside LA's progress. Not that the city did nothing, not that the city solved everything, but that America's homelessness crisis can improve on paper and still break people on the ground. Next, we go to a city where the crisis is not measured by Skid Row blocks, but by how close homelessness sits to one of America's richest coastlines. Disclaimer. This documentary is for educational and journalistic purposes only. It discusses homelessness, poverty, mental health, addiction-related issues, housing policy, and public spending. Composite characters are based on patterns from public records, housing research, shelter data, court filings, and published case studies. They are not intended to identify any specific private individual. This video does not promote illegal activity, drug use, harassment, or harmful behavior. Some footage has been edited or blurred for privacy, safety, and compliance with YouTube community guidelines.